in Austin, Texas. And I first want to let you know that we are streaming on Facebook and YouTube at the same time. I'd like to welcome back to the show a very special person, William Lowe. He's a stroke survivor, and we went through his story last week. And it's evening time here, and he is in Australia, and it's morning time. So we're going to talk about stroke therapy for stroke and brain injury. And so without further ado, let's bring on William. Let's see. And here he comes. Good.
Harry.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. Good evening, actually, because it's nighttime over in the States, right?
Yeah, it's 6 p.m. here in Austin. But I know that you have so many tools in your tool bag. Can we first start by saying, explaining why you got into teaching other stroke survivors with therapy?
Well, I think it all started when I first had my stroke, and that was about 8.5 years ago, right. In October 2011. And when I first had my stroke, that was during a time during a time when there was virtually no good information in recovery after stroke. And I noticed that when I first started my recovery journey, that for some reason I just developed this intuitive understanding of how the brain recovered. And I don't know what it was, but I think it was because I just became obsessed with, trying to get a handle and trying to figure out this whole neuroplasticity idea. Because back then when I first had my stroke, people talk about neuroplasticity, but they didn't actually practice it.
Right.
I was told about it.
Yeah. And did you know what it was? Neuroplasticity?
No, I had no idea what neuroplasticity was. Like I said, in my last appearance, I had my stroke when I was 17 years old. And, I didn't know what a physiotherapist was. I didn't know they worked in hospitals. I didn't know what an occupational therapist was. Right. I didn't even know what a neurologist was or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
They just told me when I was in hospital, yeah, your brain's going to recover because of neuroplasticity, but they didn't give me a roadmap to actually make this happen. And so I had to sort of figure out, and I had to observe what clinicians were doing while I was laying down on my bed on the ward to sort of put together the pieces of this neuroplasticity dilemma at that time.
Yeah, exactly. So what can we start with as far as therapy? Because for me, we'll start there. I have a problem bending the knee. I know the fall with my hip didn't help, but swinging the leg out. So what can somebody do for that?
Well, the first thing we have to think about when it comes to bending the knee is that the reason why your knee tends to hyperextend after you have a stroke is because your brain is so used to relying mainly on the stronger leg to bear the weight of your body, right. that left leg actually never gets an opportunity to actually work itself. The reason why our knee bends whenever we walk, so when you think about how you were walking before you had a stroke, right? The reason why your knee bends before you have a stroke is because that's the moment when it's actually bearing the weight of your body. So you might have noticed that whenever you're walking before you had your stroke, that whenever we would take that first step, our knee would bend and it would stop at that point just before it locked up or hyperextended.
Right.
But basically what happens in recovery after stroke is that we're able to bend our knee on the stronger leg, right?
Right.
So that's basically the weight of the body going over to the strong leg, right?
Yes.
But then when the weight carries over from the strong leg over to the weaker leg, because your affected leg isn't strong enough to bear the weight of your body, it's unable to, the knee isn't able to bend itself, and it sort of just locks up.
Right. And I understand that now. So, also to switch to like the arm, the affected arm, because I mean, not only the wrist, but with me, I have subluxation, which a lot of people don't really know what that is.
Yeah, well,
So,
the thing with subluxation is that's basically an indication that the muscles around the shoulder, they're not strong enough to sustain the weight of your arm, and your arm by itself, that's about let me just think about. I'm actually trying to do the calculations between pounds and kilograms, right? Because in Australia we use kilograms.
yeah.
It's probably about geez, this is tough. It's probably about 16 pounds on its own.
Okay.
So it's quite heavy.
Right.
And basically the way you can address subluxation is you can use two approaches. So one is you can use electrical stimulation. That's a really good approach if you have access to it. And that would only work for you if you don't have a pacemaker, because obviously if you have currents running through your body, it's going to interfere with your pacemaker and it's going to give you a heart attack.
Right. Not a good idea.
Yeah, and then the other approach you could take is just physical therapy, and that's basically just training up the muscles at the front of your arm so that you're able to lift up that arm and help train your brain to send signals to the muscles around the shoulder, which actually help to support the weight of the arm up.
Right.
And these muscles are basically your rotator cuff muscles, which are the ones which are on the back of the shoulder and also at the front of your not at the front of your deltoid, but basically at the front of your chest, sort of in this area, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that completely does. But what happens? I keep using myself as the guinea pig. My non-affected side, I had to get a cortisone with some other shot because I favored the affected side so much, sleeping on the non-affected side, and so I was taught now I should be sleeping on the affected side for weight bearing purposes.
Right. Well, that's a pretty controversial
Is
statement.
it?
And I'm personally not a medical professional. I just figured this out myself, and I know what works and what doesn't. I haven't personally heard of any weight bearing on the. I mean, if you're going to do weight bearing on your affected arm, then your best bet would be to do your planks or do your crawling exercises where you can actually get into a crawling position. So pretend you're crawling on the floor, but what you do is you want to put down your affected hand, you want to splay it out and use your other hand to sort of press it down so that it doesn't tighten up. So that's one thing you can do to sort of build up that strength in your shoulder.
Right.
And it's an alternative approach, which might be a lot better than sleeping on that side, because in the hospital, the reason why they tell you to put your arm over your pillow is because they want to stop that subluxation from happening.
Right. At the same time, you've had your stroke similar to mine 9-10 years ago, and I still do that. So if I'm in bed, I do put my arm under a pillow under it for that reason. And I understand. And then when I'm sitting down, like eating, I'll put my right arm down to the chair and press on it to help the subluxation. Is that correct?
Well, you see, there are a lot of approaches there are a lot of approaches out there which say that certain things will work for subluxation, but the things which do work at the end of the day are your electrical stimulation techniques, as well as the planking exercise, which I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And the reason why these work is because they actually put your body in a position where you're actually forced to put weight through that affected side.
Yes.
Because, like I mentioned in my last appearance, your brain already has an agenda of its own and it wants to do all these fancy stuff, which you necessarily don't. It wants to do stuff the easy way. And in order to make recovery actually happen, we have to force our brain in situations where it has to pay a lot of attention to the affected side,
Right.
whether
Right.
this be your arm or your leg.
Right. And I was asked by somebody about what can I do to help with my hand is not for me. This is somebody else asked about my hand is swollen most of the time, and my fingers kind of curl up, so they're not doing anything. Like well, I don't know what the doing these,
Yeah.
or wear a compression glove that helps. But to hear from you would be terrific.
Oh well, I mean, it depends on their situation, but I would definitely like, okay. So first of all, let's address the let's address what's going on here with the fingers curling up. So the reason why the fingers are curling up in this situation is because the muscles which are used to flex the fingers, they've actually become a little bit overactive. And that means that your brain is sending more signals than necessary to close the fingers, and therefore it hasn't learned how to relax them.
Right.
The reason why this actually happens is because, from an evolutionary standpoint, back when we were monkeys, we actually developed our ability to grasp first. And it was only later when we actually developed our ability to release our fingers. And so our brains are actually pre-wired to actually want to grip rather than actually open. And so when you have your stroke, your brain is literally sent back to its default setting, which is wanting to flex. And so it tends to preference wanting to turn on all those muscles which flex the fingers or flex the shoulder inwards, like a baby would when they were first born. And that's why it becomes so much more difficult to actually teach the brain how to relax those muscles and move away from that default conditioning.
Right. Now, what do you think about mirror therapy? I've used that.
I mean, can I just finish what I mentioned about the monkey thing?
Oh yes, yeah, that's right.
Suggest the and then use that as a basis to suggesting what they could possibly do for their hand.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that being said, depending on whether or not they're on a pacemaker or not, if they're not on a pacemaker, what I would suggest is you would use electrical stimulation to teach the brain how to actually relax the grip first to set you up to actually being able to open your fingers.
Right.
Because what electrical stimulation does is that it gives your brain the experience of what it looks like and feels like to actually do something like it used to before you had a stroke. And when we think about what electrical stimulation does, you've got the electricity which gives you the feeling, right?
Yes.
Which sort of gives you that feedback of what it feels like. And then your eyes, while you're watching the contraction going on, that actually gives your brain a picture of what everything looked like before you had your stroke, right?
Right.
And like I mentioned in my last appearance, your brain already knows what to do. It just needs the tools given to it to help guide it in the right direction.
Right.
In order to form a blueprint of what it looked like, or I guess the components which it had to put together in order to do whatever it had to do before you had your stroke. So the way I like to think about this is, before your stroke, whenever you were, like, if I were to use the car analogy again,
Yes.
when you were driving your car, basically your brain would whip out a blueprint of how it first learned how to drive a car. Every time you were in a shopping center or in a place where you had to reverse park or drive the car around. And what this blueprint would have is basically the different sequences of steps which would be required in order to get the result which you wanted to achieve. So when it comes to So when it comes to recovery after stroke, there are a lot of components which come to a really effective exercise. So first of all, your brain has to get an idea of, what it feels like. Obviously, it has to have a sense of, it has to have some sort of feedback, which gives it a clue about what it looked like or felt like to do that thing, that task, or that exercise before you had a stroke, right? So there are 5 keys to any effective exercise in recovery after stroke, and these are: 1, it obviously has to be really challenging, somewhat challenging or repetitive, which is common sense. Everyone knows that. So that's 1 and 2, challenging and repetitive. Number three is that it has to be somewhat related to whatever task you're trying to achieve. So it has to be somewhat functional. That being said, you can't just do a hand grip like 100 times. And then the 4th one is that it has to be modifiable, which basically means that there isn't just one level to it. It means that as you progress in your recovery, you're able to change the way you do that task or exercise with respect to your progress, so that your brain can actually justify to itself why it has to keep recovering and become a lot better at that skill. And the last one is the one we've already talked about, which is the feedback. So those are your 5: repetitive, challenging, somewhat related task, able to be modified, and feedback.
Right. Very interesting. I appreciate all those, because I understand that. But so you've learned what you didn't learn. Does that make sense? When you were at therapy, you found out they kind of went through just a textbook type of therapy, and you want to do other things that work for you.
Well, I guess when I was going, wait, are you talking about when I was in hospital, or are you talking about when I was at university? Okay, so when I was in hospital, like I mentioned, there was virtually no good information on recovery after stroke. I was told about neuroplasticity, but when I asked the therapist, can you explain how to make things happen, they didn't really have a response for that. They just told me, just do it, or something along those lines, like, either just do it, shut up and don't ask questions, that like sort of response, or don't worry, you're young, you'll recover, you don't really have to try to take any responsibility for your recovery.
Wow.
And then so it kind of got annoying, because I was 17 years old. I was a really determined young person, and I really wanted to get this handled. So I literally had to braid my therapist every single session. I had to ask him, why are you suggesting this exercise, and how does this exercise relate to my recovery after stroke, and what's going on in my brain when I'm doing this exercise? And then I would literally have to force them to explain their reasoning, so that I would be able to form a picture, or I guess form a lens for me to view therapy or recovery after stroke with. And so in the last 8 or 9 years, that's basically what I've been doing. Every time I've seen a therapist, every time I've talked to a doctor, I come home and I've documented what I've learned, and I've used whatever I learned and applied it to my own recovery to reinforce my learning again. So learning through experience.
Right. Yeah, it does make sense. And I know we've talked many times about this. So why is it so important to get for me, I think it's really important to get your non-affected side doing the same thing as your affected side, kind of like mirror imaging. Is that true?
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, you see, mirror therapy, that works on the idea of mirror neurons, which is basically this idea that both of your hemispheres are connected, right?
Right.
And what they found in studies is that most of your recovery after stroke, that actually happens with the unaffected hemisphere, helping to take over some of what was lost on the affected hemisphere.
Right.
So basically what you can picture is you can picture sort of like this part of the brain sending a signal over to the other side of the brain and sort of forming a bridge, right?
Right. Rewiring it. You're
Yeah,
rewiring.
and like so basically using this side of the brain to teach the other side of the brain what it forgot what it forgot how to do.
Right. And that's why I thought for me, it worked good, the mirror therapy, as long as you're not peeking at if you put your hand, hit your affected one in the box or the mirror box, and then you do with, it seemed to work for me, but
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's this idea that you're tricking your brain into
yeah,
thinking that it's using the affected side, so that it can again, with that feedback, justify to itself that it has to pick up its game and I guess work a lot harder to get to move things around the brain, whatever resources it has to make that movement come back, whatever it is you're practicing in the mirror.
right. And you also, do you recommend, because I did it the other day when you were talking about lifting the shoulders, doing the same exact things. And I look into a mirror and I could see I wasn't doing so correctly until I looked at the mirror. I said, oh, I have to kind of get right, because I can see one shoulder is not doing the same thing as the other shoulder.
Yeah, of course. I mean, again, like I mentioned before, your brain has its own agenda of what it wants to do.
Yeah.
And it always needs that feedback in order to help direct in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly.
And so by using the mirror as a sort of feedback technique, what you were able to do is you were able to correct the brain and show it, the correct way it should be doing it.
Right,
and
right.
I think that's really important in recovery after stroke, because quite often, there's this huge emphasis on exercise in recovery after stroke, and so people get into this mindset without the exercise and bang out like 500 repetitions of an exercise every single day.
Right.
But then what actually happens in this situation is that the first 10 or 50 are good, but then the last 450 are terrible, because their brain literally fries its own circuits.
Right.
And then it ends up wanting to turn on more muscles than necessary to do something, which only required maybe 5% mental effort before you had a stroke. And
Right.
so for the rest of the recovery, rather than raising up their arm like this, they're doing all fancy stuff like this and using their trunk and their whole entire body to do it, because their brain has literally been conditioned to turn on more muscles than necessary from the start, because it wasn't given the correct feedback on how to correctly do it.
Right. And I see Paul here. Yes, they inform you, but they don't educate you on your recovery.
Yes, that is right, Paul. I mean, in my experience, what I found when I was in hospital is that they didn't wrap the treatment around with education. So
Right.
they would just tell me to they would just tell me to do an exercise, and when I asked them why did I have to do this exercise, they just told me, just do it. They didn't really answer the question. They didn't give me the neuroscience, which doesn't make sense, because especially in recovery after stroke, it's about applying the theory to create treatment, which will help your clients or your patients get to the next level of their recovery,
Right.
or start to see changes.
Exactly.
And,
Can you?
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean that explains why there are so many magic fixes and magic bullets in this recovery after stroke market, because therapists didn't never explain the education part.
Completely understand that. But we don't know any better when we first get there, because I had no clue what was right or wrong. When I first had the stroke, I just did what they said to do in the beginning, because I really didn't know. They're a therapist. I figured they knew exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah, that's right. But the thing is, the thing is, in university, what they teach you when it comes to recovery after stroke is it's basically a textbook. It's it's basically someone just reiterating what they read from a textbook, 30 or 40 years ago. But the thing with recovery after stroke is that a lot has changed in our understanding of how the brain recovers after stroke, since the mid 2000s. But unfortunately, because you're working in a system where your only job is to, I mean, look, this is just my own understanding. I mean, for those who actually work in a healthcare system, they would obviously have a better understanding. But because you're just working within a position description, there's no checkbox which says that you have to keep yourself updated on the latest knowledge in recovery after stroke, which is really difficult, because recovery after stroke and treatments for stroke, they change every 2 months at least, or every month.
Right.
And it's really difficult to keep up. You have to be reading a lot of articles.
Right. And Delia says, God, I hope I didn't butcher your, I watch you all the time. But do you see her kind of the question there?
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
A good exercise for
an exercise for your knee. Okay. So this is okay. So with regards to getting your knee back, and I mean I'm assuming you're in a position where your knee is not wanting to cooperate when you walk, right? And maybe it's hyperextending. So an exercise you could do with that is you could actually try to, whenever you walk, you could actually try to consciously bend your affected knee whenever you walk, rather than just throwing it forward. Because one thing I found with the clients I've worked with is that whenever they're in a situation where they're walking and their knee is hyperextending or want to lock completely, it's because they're mainly relying on their stronger side to take on most of the weight, and their affected leg hasn't had an opportunity to take on that weight, and that's why it's not bending. So one thing you could do is you could have it first have a think about how you used to walk before stroke, and you'll probably remember that you bent your knee on both legs whenever you walked, right? So whenever you walk, I mean, if you are walking right now, Delia, will it?
Yeah.
When you are walking now, what I'd suggest is try bending your affected knee whenever you take that first step, and then over time, what will happen is your brain will actually start to get that light bulb moment, and it will realize that it should actually put more weight on that affected leg, and because it's already got the unaffected side down, it will be able to join up the pieces together, and it will be able to realize that this is how it felt like to put weight on both legs, like it used to before you had your stroke. So that's just one simple trick you could do, and that's one thing I picked up in hospital when I was first learning how to walk after stroke.
Right. It's interesting. I probably have mine. Hopefully, it's not a dumb way to do it, but before the Corona stuff, I'd go to the grocery store with my wife, but we do different now, curbside. But anyway, I used to get the cart, hold on to the cart, and I used to swing my leg all the time. I still do, but not as bad. So I get to a cart, the shopping cart, and I make sure if I swung the leg out, I'd be hitting a tire and I'd lose my balance. So I make sure I have to lift my leg up. So I would, and it worked. I didn't do it all the time, but yeah, you understand that one.
Yeah, just hold on. I just got to blow my nose really quickly. Just really,
well, it's morning time there. No worries.
Yeah. Okay. So you were saying that. When you were at the shopping mall, right, you were swinging your leg forward. Is that right?
Well, when I used to, well, I still do. I'm not the best at this, but when I walk, I swing my leg out. Most stroke survivors do that, right? They swing their leg out when they first start walking. But me going to walking with a shopping cart, I would hit the tire. So I have to lift my leg. And I notice when I lift the leg more, I don't have the swing as much.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so first of all, the reason why your brain wants to swing the leg forward so much is because I'm not sure what happened, but when you first had your stroke, there was obviously a lot of reliance on the stronger leg to get by with the walking, and so over the years, what 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 happened with the brain is that it's basically used the strong side as a basis of support in order to get the affected leg moving.
Right.
And because you're using the stronger leg or the unaffected leg as an anchor or basis of support, over the years, your brain has conditioned itself to recruit as much effort as possible in order to lift up the affected leg and swing it forward. And so rather than using one muscle to swing your affected leg forward, your brain is wanting to use a hip as well, rather than the muscles below the knee or in front of your thigh, in order to move the leg forward like you used to before you had your stroke. Because you probably remember before your stroke, whenever you were swinging your leg forward, you wouldn't recruit your entire hip to do that, right?
Now I am.
A lot of it would actually come below your knee or at the front of your thigh to below your knee.
Right. And I can see Janice saying, Jerry, do you swing from the hip? I do. You probably see my videos that I post, and I look at it and think, wow, I'm doing it wrong. But then I need, I can't go to therapy just because I won't go because of this COVID-19. So I need to have like you or, because that's what you do now for a living, isn't it?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, and I mean that is something I'm happy to elaborate on later on. It isn't. There is no such thing in recovery after stroke as you do one exercise and then everything's cured, right?
Yeah.
The reason why walking and getting back your hand it takes such a long time is because it's literally lining up a couple of dominoes, maybe a lot of dominoes or little exercises which you would do, and then having all these put together and set up so that when you flick one domino, then your brain actually realizes how it used to do stuff before you had your stroke.
Yeah.
There is no I mean we were talking about this before about the lottery ticket of success where you just get a lottery ticket and you immediately win the money. That doesn't happen in recovery after stroke. There's no such thing as a magic fix. In order to see changes in recovery after stroke, what has to happen is you have to have a look at what's going on or what's challenging at the moment, and then you have to literally design an exercise out of scratch to directly address what's going on with your recovery after stroke, whether this be walking with the knee wanting to hyperextend rather than bend, or I guess not being able to rotate your shoulder and bring it back around, and having your arm want to come up like this all the time.
Yeah, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and this is why I mentioned earlier in my first appearance that the textbook approach when I went to university, it didn't resonate with me. I felt there was a constant conflict for me between what I had personally experienced as a patient going to hospital, where they were doing different things, to what they were teaching at university.
Right. So, and you were there 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, it was 3 years, and basically I was just banging my head against the wall because every time I would show up to placement wanting to be progressive and actually wanting to push the envelope and help someone beyond the job description, they were punishing me for that.
Yeah, I remember you told me about that. Now, Paul said, or possibly TENS or M's for a knee to stimulate muscles. Just a thought. Now, when I had mine, they put the the little unit 10s or on my thigh, and they made it, to try to strengthen my thigh, my quad of that. So is that, I don't know, Paul, is that what you're kind of going at? That you see?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you could use electrical stimulation for your knee. That definitely works. That's a really good approach. And back to your question about your knee when you were in therapy, Jerry.
Yes.
The reason why they were getting you to do that exercise is because they wanted to teach your knee to stop hyperextending whenever you walk. Right. Because the reason why your knee doesn't want to bend is because the muscles around the knee, they're not strong enough to support the weight of your body as it transfers over from your strong side over to your unaffected side over to your affected side. That's why it wants to buckle. It's because the muscles around the knee, they're not strong enough to stop the knee just before that point where it completely locks up.
Yeah, I totally understand that. So Janice, her husband, had this stroke, and he moves from the hip when he's kicking leg out on the chair.
That's pretty hard to picture. But if it's mainly coming from the hip, it's definitely an indication that there's a lot of compensation going on there. And it definitely tells me that for him, his brain has adapted after stroke such that it wants to use a lot of the big bulk muscles to do the walking, which is necessary in recovery, which is necessary when you're getting back to walking in recovery after stroke. But if you're just relying on the big hip muscles to do most of the walking, then that's when you see all this funny and fancy stuff happen, where your brain wants to initiate a lot of the movement from the hip and not from the thigh and below.
Right. Okay. So what can so Janet, he's not using knee at all. I have to manually bend it. So she's helping him do that. Is there another exercise that possibly he could do?
Well, I would just go back to your squats, to your squats exercise, because when you're coming down, you're actually bending the knee already. Yeah, so I would just go back to that. I would just go back to the drawing board and just start with the basics and just do your standing up exercises. Yeah, I would definitely just go for that one.
Okay.
But then I would do the nose over toes one, which I'm sure everyone has heard. Have you heard of that one, Jerry?
What's it called? The nose on the toes?
It's called nose over toes, right? So basically, it's where you're setting yourself up in a position before you stand up, where your feet are hip width apart and level, and then before you stand, what you want to do is you want to shuffle your bottom forward, and then you want to get into a position where your head is over your toes or your nose are over your toes, and in that position, what you want to do is you want to stand up from that position, and that's basically a position which forces your brain to put equal weight on both sides of your body. Sorry, both legs.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that, because I was taught to do squats, make sure they're a little wider than your shoulder.
Yeah.
And then make sure when I start doing it, I look in the mirror, because like you said earlier, I always put my weight on the good side, my non-affected side. And I was not doing it. I wasn't putting enough weight on that side. So when you widen your legs more than the shoulder width apart, you get the better results. That's what she said, my therapist.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just one of those strategic positions which forces your brain to do the right thing, because your brain always wants to rely mainly on the stronger leg to do everything, right? You have to force it to put more effort into using the affected side.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, so I would start with just basic weight bearing and going back to the drawing board and addressing the underlying issue behind why the knee's not bending. And then from there, and then from there, once you've got that down pat, then start to look at more advanced exercises to build on that foundation, because it sounds like based on what you've told me that, there is a lot more going on than just the knee not wanting to bend. It's not just a knee problem. It's also like the whole mechanics of the problem. The whole mechanics of the walking needs to be addressed based on what your brain has learned from the very beginning. And this is really important because quite often in recovery after stroke, and this is something I see with a lot of the clients who I work with, is that a lot of the challenges which they present, it's based on how their brain was conditioned to recover from the very start of the recovery. And quite often the exercises which would help them best, it actually requires going back to where they first started and then having a look at what happened there and then addressing that first before they can get to the next level and start to see changes in the recovery after stroke.
Okay. So, well, Janice, there you go. William explained that. So she said she's going to try that. Well, that's awesome. Let's see. So is there any other questions that you guys have and you want to know? Because William is here and he could definitely give us some guidance on that. So that nose over toes, that's a good one. I like the way you said that. And obviously Paul does too. So what else can we do for, you obviously work with brain injury as well. Well,
just stroke. I only do stroke. Yeah.
That's great. So we understand.
Well, I mean, it's hard to say because I think when it comes to recovery after stroke, it all comes down to having an education or being educated or being self-educated, on, right, what actually happens in recovery after stroke and how to make this happen. Because like I mentioned before, there are 5 components to a successful exercise which forces recovery to happen in the brain after stroke. And I think the one thing to remember is that in recovery after stroke, no matter what your experience is, no matter wherever you are in your journey, whether this be 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years down the track, we have to remember that so the only way we can see changes in recovery is by doing exercises which cater to how our brain prefers to learn. And this is through feedback or experience, right? Yes. So there's a term, it's called experience-dependent plasticity. I'm not sure if all of you have heard of it, but in case you haven't, it's basically this idea that our brain has to experience what it looks like and feels like to actually start to justify to itself how to adapt itself to become better at what it's trying to learn. And so if you can find exercises which are completely new to the brain, so provide a new experience to the brain, as well as give it some sort of idea or some sort of clue about how it used to do something before the stroke, then you're essentially in a position where you can start to make recovery happen for yourself without spending hundreds and thousands of dollars on fancy gadgets and whatnot.
Yeah,
and that's because you're just going back to the fundamentals of how the brain likes to recover,
right?
And then you're just creating exercise out of scratch to help guide in the right direction.
Right. And so Deb here, how do you work on your balance?
Well, Deborah, that's what you meant. How I personally do it, or just general exercises.
I think I'm going to be guessing is generally because Deb's a stroke survivor as well. So maybe Deb, you're talking about yourself, correct? I don't know, but maybe you could for her.
Okay, so Deborah, this is obviously going to be dependent on where you are in your recovery. But if you watched my first appearance, I mentioned that one way to improve your balance is rather than going up the stairs with your strong leg, going up the stairs with your unaffected leg first, because from the very start of your recovery, your brain has been conditioned to go up with the stronger leg because that was what was safe, right? So you want to move away from that dependence on the strong leg do everything in your life, and you want to start leading with the affected leg first, and it's not just stairs. This is everything. I mean, one thing you could start doing is, look, this is just a really quick tip, is you could literally just put a block in front of you, and then you could try stepping over it with your affected leg first, because your affected leg is going to be taking on most of your weight as you step over that block. Make sure it's not too high of a block. You don't want to set the bar too high. You want to make sure the exercise is just challenging enough to give your brain that experience. So I would start with like a small textbook just to start with. Again, I don't know where you are in your recovery after stroke. It's just general information, and I wouldn't want you to get hurt or anything. But that's just one suggestion I would make.
I see what you said there.
If the stairs are too difficult, but I mean, if you tip over and you go backwards, then I would it's a really tricky situation, and it's definitely not something I can address live right now without knowing more information about your situation. But I would just start with using your affected leg more rather than your unaffected leg to get by.
Yeah, hopefully that answers the question there, or gives you some guidance there, Deb. So Janice, we're 8 years post-stroke, and I keep going back to basics. Every time he has a seizure, he starts all over again. Yeah, seizures are not fun.
Yeah, no, that's a really that's a tricky. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot to address there beyond the extent I'm able to cover while we're live here. But I mean, you mentioned that your balance was obviously your main priority now. So I hope that those tips would help you out. They won't get you there. There will obviously be a lot of steps in between just that one exercise and also where you want to go. But it will set you off in the right direction.
Awesome. Well, there she is. Thank you, Deb is saying so. And she's 10 years out. So, but so I'm sure you've got a lot of tools in your bag. Tricks to the trade, what we can do to, I mean, me too. I need some of those guidances that you're talking about, because there's, I mean, my arm's perfectly straight. I don't have them, but when I walk, it kind of gets up a little, and I try to remember all these little things.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm working on trying to bend my leg, but then I find myself with the arm tweaking. So,
yeah, well, that's that's basically that's a really sophisticated thing you're going through, and it's not something where I can just suggest one thing you do, and then everything will be cured. That's how it works. But I can explain what's going on. What's going on is that because your brain is working really hard to perfect the walking, it wants to turn on all of the cylinders, and it wants to turn on everything in order to get everything perfect. And that's why your arm wants to go up. So that's the first scenario, right? It's that your brain wants to turn everything on because it's so focused on the walking that the arm wants to go up. Second situation is because you mentioned you had the shoulder subluxation. Did they have a sling?
When I left, yes, but I do not use it, because sometimes if I feel it, I'll lift my shoulder. But then if I'm walking and doing a video or doing something, I don't even worry about it, because it's not that bad, but it's enough where I can feel it. I mean, I could feel like it comes out of its socket, but it's not bad. But so I don't worry about it too much. But I think when I'm walking, I lift the arm, and I can do it by bending it, and I have no issues, because I'm just worried about the walking, my gait, not swinging the leg out. So many things to think about, and that's why, I mean, where do I start? It's a lot of issues.
Yeah. Okay. So I would first start with the walking, because you obviously don't want your brain to your. I mean, in order for your brain to switch off the top part of your body, so your arm, it
Right.
has to learn how to get to a point where it's got walking down pat at a subconscious level, so that it can sort of put the walking on autopilot where and then it can worry about the upper body by itself. But
Right.
quite often in recovery after stroke, your brain loses that ability to autopilot, and that's why you have to do a lot of exercises to sort of show it how to turn off one part of the body and then turn on the other side of the body. And that's why people have tinnitus or spasticity. It's because your brain doesn't know how to regulate those signals which it's sending to turn the muscles on and off properly.
Right. Right. So, Paul, yes, relaxing the arm while walking is difficult. Okay, so I'm not the only one out there just messing
Yeah,
around.
of course. So basically, what I just explained to Jerry, that's completely applicable to your situation as well. Um, Again, I don't know the specifics, but I can tell, based on what I've seen with people I've worked with, is that quite often it's linked to the walking and their brain not knowing how to put the walking on autopilot, which means that which basically means that their brain hasn't been able to. I guess their walking isn't at a point where they're able to put equal weight on both sides of the body. It's still relying on the strong side. So if you can get to a point where you can get to 50-50, then what you'll find is that it can become a lot easier to address the arm. Because when we walked before we had a stroke, we didn't consciously swing our arm forward and backward, right? It just came naturally. But after stroke, we actually lose that ability to autopilot, and that's because of that. And that's because the signals coming from the brain to your muscles, they've been disrupted and they don't work as well as they used to. So that's why we do exercise. It's to retrain our brain to send those signals like it used to before you had a stroke, as and then refine it as the years go on until you're at a point where your brain's as close as it was to where it used to be before stroke.
Yeah, no, I understand. So for walking, since I'm dealing with it because of the hip, I can't remember if my therapist ever. I've had so many therapists, but tell me when I'm walking, does it have to be if I'm a few inches in front of one foot, then I take another step? Should it be exactly the same, a few inches in front of that foot? Does that make sense?
Uh, I think what you're trying to say, and I'm just trying to clarify so that I can get a better picture. Is are you trying to say that you're wanting to make sure that each step you take is sort of a certain distance apart?
That's it. My gait.
Okay. And is that what they mentioned to you when you were in hospital?
They did, but that was a long time ago. But then only one time they said that. So I've never, no, I just figured that's what I have to do. And I didn't exactly know because I never thought about it. Like you say, before the stroke, I just walked.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think that's something. Well, I guess the steps, the length you take in between steps, that's something which comes back naturally, as you're able to teach your brain how to send those signals to the muscles in your leg a lot better.
Right.
And the reason why I say this is because whenever we used to walk before stroke, there are basically a couple of components which go into it. So you've got stride length and cadence. So stride length is basically where this is basically where the speed of your walking is based on how long, how let me see if I can get this right. It's basically where the speed of your walking is based on how long your strides are, and then cadence is based on how many steps you take when you're walking. So you can be walking, but fast, but then you can be taking long strides, or you can be walking fast, but you can be taking small steps. All of these components, they usually improve as you're able to specifically address those muscles in your leg to actually become a lot better at firing whenever you're walking in your recovery after stroke. And this requires obviously a lot of targeted exercises after stroke.
Right. So if anybody else has the same thing, when I'm walking, I try really hard to lift the leg up, the effective side, just to make sure I'm doing it correctly. And if I take a bigger gait, and I think that, I don't know if this is just because of my hip that I broke it. So I basically had to teach myself, because when I left therapy for my hip, I got to a point where I had to put some weight, like 50% on the right leg. So then the COVID thing happened, and I was discharged. I couldn't walk. Had my wheelchair. So it's like I took a step back, but now I'm walking. I don't use the wheelchair, but it's not a pretty sight. But but you'll see when we.
No. Yeah, but the thing with I mean when it comes to getting back to walking after stroke, it's really all about correcting that learned preference for the stronger leg to want to do most of the walking and recovery after stroke. So you want to, if you're in a place in your recovery where you're wanting to recover, or where you're wanting to, I guess, return to walking unassisted as quickly as possible, it really comes down to having a look at how much you're actually relying on the stronger leg to walk whenever you get around. And if you can force your brain to put more emphasis on the affected leg, then what you'll find is that your walking will naturally become better, because your brain is reminded of what it felt like to actually walk before you had your stroke. And you can do this by putting your brain in situations where it's forced to put that weight on that affected leg. So these situations are your bridges, your squats, obviously going upstairs with the affected leg, and also the other one I mentioned, where you're obviously walking over a textbook or a little block, initiating with your affected leg as well.
Right. And I can see Janice here. Can nerves get mixed up if I am moving John's arm? He can get pain elsewhere. Is this something to do with the brain?
Okay, so I'm not a neurologist, so I can't. That's not something I can explicitly answer right now. I would suggest that you go see your doctor for that one, because that's a little bit beyond what I know personally.
Right. I bet it has something to do with neuroplasticity, or I'm way far from a neurologist, obviously. So, I mean, you're closer, William. So, because you went to school for this, and
yeah.
But yeah. So, what else is something we can? I'm just looking at if there's any other questions out here, because I appreciate all this stuff that you're telling me, because some of it is going to help me too. And I do the squats, but I don't do them enough. So,
yeah, that's right. I mean, it's great to hear that you're doing the squats, but quite often, the way you're doing a certain thing, it might need to be changed in order for your brain to actually get that light bulb moment of what it's supposed to feel like.
right.
So quite often that's something which is missing with recovery after stroke, and that's something we can talk about later. But I mean, it just goes to show, like, for those of you who are listening, wherever you are in your recovery after stroke, if you're noticing that maybe changes are not as quick as they used to be, and maybe you're feeling that things might be at a standstill, even though you're working really hard in your recovery, and you're really, really trying hard to make things happen, it might just be because whatever you're doing, it just requires some sort of change in order to help your brain get to that light bulb moment, which I talked about in my first appearance on the show earlier this week, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. The brain, yeah. And Serena, you're right. The brain is a tricky little bugger. That's
Yeah.
so
So
true.
your brain always has its agenda of how it wants to recover. It's up to ourselves as someone who can actually zoom out and actually see the brain to actually guide in the right direction.
Yeah. Good point here, Janice. So her husband, John, does squats over the toilet. He feels safe there. And you know what? That's probably great. If you don't have the good balance and all that, I think it'd be a perfect way. Or near the couch because it's a little softer if you fall.
Yeah, sure. I wouldn't recommend the couch because the couch is so low. Getting up from a lower position, it's a lot more difficult, and because it's challenging, you're essentially putting your brain into a position where it will want to use the stronger leg to actually stand up because it is such a lower elevation. So if you can find a place where you're able to stand up from something which is about, I'm not sure how high, but which is about hip height, then that would be ideal.
Right.
So again,
yes.
all you guys can see, the emphasis here is putting your brain in situations where you're forcing it to put more emphasis on the affected leg to do the exercise. Because in recovery after stroke, your brain wants to get lazy. We have to really police it to recover. This isn't something where this isn't recovery which happens similarly to if you were to break an arm and there's a given time frame for when you would recover. This is something where you have to actively work on it every single day.
Yeah.
That means every time you get up off the bed, every time you enter the shower, every time you get off from the toilet, you have to tell yourself to put more effort on that affected leg to get up.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's absolutely true. I know that we're over an hour. Let's see, Serena. Okay, I can't you see Serena.
Yeah. It is safe to do so. Definitely, safety is obviously a priority whenever you're doing these exercises, depending on where you are in your recovery after stroke.
Right.
But the main point is you have to. This is something which you have to work at every single day. Okay, you have to consciously tell yourself to keep doing those good habits until your brain does those naturally.
Yeah, I understand. So we're over an hour. So I know we keep going.
Yeah, of course. We could talk about this for a long time. But I don't want to. And obviously there are going to be a lot of questions about recovery after stroke. It is such a big topic. But I'm not sure if we can cover it all.
No, it's going to take more time to do this. So
yeah, of course. But I think the main point. But I think the main point is really just. I think the main point is really when it comes to returning to walking after stroke, building up those good habits, making sure that you're making sure that you're putting your brain in conditions where you're literally forcing the affected leg to do most of the work, and then also if you're further down the line in your recovery and you're looking for exercises to make changes happen in your recovery, making sure that these exercises are giving your brain some sort of feedback of what it felt like or looked like to do whatever you're trying to learn before you had your stroke. Examples such as electrical stimulation, such as going upstairs with your affected leg first, and so on and so forth. There are many more examples there. Obviously it will be impossible because it would be beyond the extent of how much time we have to cover all of these. But there are limitless possibilities when you really get this handled.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. And Janice, I'm glad you got a lot out of this in the last 8 years. So, William, thank you. That was pretty awesome. But I know we need to do this again because I have a ton more questions. Just if I went right in the order, I like the way we did it today because you just covered a lot of different things, and I appreciate that. And I know everybody's been saying that if you see the comments, so I appreciate that. I know I don't know if there's any last final words for recovery after stroke as far as therapy, but there's so much to go into.
Yeah, there is a lot to cover. This is a pretty hot topic.
Yes.
And there is new information coming out every single day about recovery after stroke and new treatments and whatnot. But as I mentioned in this show, it all comes down to really understanding your fundamentals. It's just like if you were learning your maths, right? In order to do your long division or your algebra, you would actually first have to understand your numbers, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And these would set you up for the bigger advanced stuff. But if you didn't know your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so if you didn't know your basic numbers, you wouldn't be able to understand how to do the advanced stuff. So when it comes to recovery after stroke, if you don't know how the brain recovers and you don't know how it prefers to learn, then you won't be able to create exercises which actually cater to how it learns and start to see changes in your recovery after stroke. And that's a real, I wouldn't say it's a magic fix, but that's the, if there is a magic fix or bullet, that's really the bullet. It's knowing how the brain recovers and knowing how to modify your exercises as you recover in order to keep seeing changes no matter how far you are in your recovery after stroke, whether this be 2, 3, 4, or even 5 years down the line.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
What's going on with your recovery? Coming up with an exercise to give your brain the tools it needs in order to address whatever is going on.
I appreciate all that, and it looks like everybody else. I mean, great stuff, William. Yeah, we're gonna have to still do this again because, and it'd be great if everybody can ask questions like they did now. So,
no problem at all. I mean, for those of you who are listening, myself and Jerry, I'll be open to doing a Q&A, a sort of Q&A show sometime in the future,
right?
Where hopefully I can address all the questions because I know that there's so much out there about stroke which is unknown. I've been fortunate. To have been surrounded by clinicians and doctors, and actually who have told me and shown me, and sort of given me education behind why they do certain things, and actually gone to university, been able to surround myself in this stuff to actually understand it. But I know there are a lot of questions. It's going to be impossible to address all of them in one show. We are probably going to have to do more.
100%. We need to, and Paul, you're right, as well as nutrition. So we can talk about that too. That's a big important part of recover on this. So anyway, William, I think you covered as much as you could.
Yeah,
in
definitely.
A little short time, but you're right. There's so much more to cover. So let's plan on doing this again.
Yeah. Okay.
So you guys out there, thank you for being here and making comments, and I would share it to other stroke survivors or anybody that can get something out of it because it is very important. So, William, take care, and we will do this again. So have a great. You have a good morning.